Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Salmon Watch program. So, my name is Greg Stebeck, as you can see from your screen, and my background is in hydrology. So, I'm a water scientist. So, what I do as a career is I study both rivers and streams. I get to do a lot of chemistry. If you ever here, you'll never use your chemistry for anything else. So I'm living proof that I use it almost every day. I use a lot of math, and I get to go outside, which is what I really wanted to do. So, what is Salmon Watch? So, Salmon Watch is a way to learn about watershed health and really looking at it from the salmon's point of view. So, from the river or stream, things that affect salmon. So, the program, depending on what we're available to do, it may include field trips, hands on activities. We're also doing some interactive programs, some virtual sessions, and then also some classrooms discussions. So it could be live in class, or perhaps you're watching this as an alternative to doing a in-class session. So what the purpose of this program really is to prepare you for a field trip or just to do other activities in the Salmon Watch program. So what we're really here to do is, or what we get to do as part of the program is we get to be scientists, we get to investigate. If we happen to interact with volunteers, we ask that you're courteous to the volunteers, that you make sure you're not afraid to ask questions, and that you have fun. But first, we want to start off with just a little quiz. So it's going to be a little bit different depending on what part of the watershed do you live in. So this is a general knowledge question, so we'll start off that. So if you live in the greater Medford area, what is the name of the creek that runs from Ashland through Central Point? Is it Ashland Creek, Rogue Creek, Bear Creek, or Emigrant Creek? And the bonus question is, where does it end up flowing into? So basically from the creek, it goes to where? And if you're outside of the area, kind of a similar question, what is the name of the watershed that we all live in? Is it the Illinois River, the Rogue Basin, Bear Creek, Little Butte Creek, and where does the water end up? So I'll just allow just a few seconds to discuss, your thoughts on what the answer could be before I switch slides and show you what it is. Okay, so if you're in the greater Medford area, the answer is Bear Creek. So Bear Creek is the stream that flows along I-5. And where does it end up flowing into? So Bear Creek goes straight into the Rogue River over by the Table Rocks, and then it ends up all the way into the Pacific Ocean. So we like to just remind everyone that everything's connected. So anything that goes into Bear Creek can end up in the ocean. And similar for in terms of connection for those of you who live outside of the Bear Creek Basin, we all live in the Rogue. Bear Creek is actually part of the Rogue Basin, as is Little Butte Creek, as is the Illinois River. So it's all part of the Rogue. So the Rogue goes from Crater Lake to roughly Gold Beach, and the water ends up in the Pacific Ocean as well. So since we're focused on fish and salmon, we have a fish question. Can you name any fish in the Rogue River that live part of their life cycle in freshwater and part in saltwater? And the scientific term for that is called anadromous. Okay, so fish species, there's 4. Salmon, so there's Chinook and coho salmon. There are some species of trout, steelhead, the Pacific lamprey, and there's also a sturgeon species in the lower Rogue that also can spend part of its time in both fresh and salt water. So bug question. So again, we had a general knowledge question, we had a fish question, now we have our bug question, so focusing on macroinvertebrates. Can you see a macroinvertebrate with your eye unaided, so without a microscope, a magnifier, or other device? And then, do these critters have a backbone? And actually, as you can see in the picture there, that is actually a picture of a macroinvertebrate. I believe that is something called a mayfly. So macroinvertebrates, it's any animals lacking a backbone and large enough to see without the aid of a microscope. So macro, you can see it with your eye. So yes, you can see it unaided. And then it's a invertebrate, so it means it does not have a backbone. Okay, so your water quality question. So again, this is all related to Salmon Watch program and the modules. Do salmon like warm water or cold water? So they like cold water. So they're cold water species. And then we have a tree question for the riparian areas. And why are trees important? What are some functions of the trees that, specifically for the riparian area, but just in general, why do we like trees? Why are these, in this picture, the students planting trees? So some examples, they provide shade. So it keeps the water cooler. They provide oxygen for us to breathe. Roots, so basically they hold the soil in place. So that's something that prevents or helps to prevent erosion. And then also it provides habitat for terrestrial critters and birds. And then also when the trees eventually die and they fall into the stream, that can provide some habitat for the fish as well. So again, just circling back, what is Salmon Watch? A program to learn about watershed health, water quality, and stewardship from the salmon's perspective. And what we're going to do is test the hypothesis of, do salmon like to live in area streams, and then why or why not. So basically, depending on what you're interested in, if you happen to get out and be able to go out into the field or participate in a virtual session where we're collecting data or doing it on your own, you can answer the question of whether or not you think the stream conditions or river conditions are good for salmon. So what is a watershed? So basically a watershed, you can see it in the picture here, it's an area of the land where all of the water that is under it or drains off of it collects into the same place. So basically as it rains, you can see, unfortunately, oh, there we go. So you can see here it's raining. So it's raining on the mountains, raining a little bit of snow here, and the water goes down, say this river, goes from the farmland, goes through some homes and roads, dams, plants, and eventually the ocean. So all this area collects to this one spot. So that's a watershed. Again, we talked Bear Creek watershed. We talked about the Rogue Basin. Basin is another name for a watershed as well. So Oregon watersheds, as I mentioned, here's Bear Creek highlighted for you, and here is the Greater Rogue Basin located in southwestern Oregon. And so Salmon Watch provides an opportunity to learn from local experts who work in the field. It could be from somebody like in the Rogue Valley Council of Governments, who I work for, local soil and water conservation district, watershed council, local communities, Central Point, City of Medford, City of Ashland. So just a lot of opportunity for interactions with people who actually do this professionally for a living. So how does it work? As I talked a little bit about before, there are 4 main sections of Salmon Watch, 4 modules, and one of them talks about salmon biology, salmon life cycle. One deals with macroinvertebrates, one addresses water quality conditions, and one talks about the importance of riparian areas. So that's why the questions in your quiz kind of focused on those topic areas. So here's an example of some Chinook salmon in a local stream. So the salmon. So this is actually something we see. Typically programs are conducted in October. That's when the fall Chinook are coming back. So it tends to be the greatest opportunity to see fish. However, we also conduct programs in the spring and other times of year, and fish are generally in the stream all year. So salmon biology. So what we talk about in the salmon biology section are the different species of salmon, the types of salmon, talk a little bit about their life cycle, talk about their behavior, and again, right time of year, see salmon in the stream. And then there's also dissection. You can see there's number 1s and number 2. So behavior and the salmon in the stream are 1, dissection is 2. So we have 2 different options for teaching salmon biology, and it depends on the instructor and time of year. We can either talk more about behavior and seeing the salmon, or we can also do a dissection, but you'll generally see one or the other, but not both. So types of salmon, what we find in the area streams around here, we find Chinook, we find coho, and we find steelhead typically. So salmon and trout anatomy, again, if you do dissection, cover this, all the different parts of the fish. So you see it from the outside. And then one of the cool things I might talk about is a scale. And the scales act a lot like a tree ring in terms of the growth rings actually tell how old the fish is. So in this case, it looks like the fish is about 5 years old. It also talks about the life cycle. So basically, you know, how the salmon come up back upstream, back upriver to spawn, and then they lay eggs, and how the eggs go from, well, the eggs to, you know, the smolts that juvenile fish that head to the ocean, and then basically when they come back. So I'll talk about that. And just a summary, each fish on average lays about 4,000 eggs, 800 of them hatch, 200 smolts return to the sea, so 200 young fish return to the sea, and that they end up, about 10 of them survive to be adults, and usually 2 make it back upstream to spawn from where they came from. So just different life cycles or life stages. Alvin are newly hatched fish, and they basically carry around their yolk sacs, and they get nourishment from their yolk sacs. And they stay in the river gravel until the sac is absorbed, and it usually takes several weeks. So another thing we might take a look at if we talk about salmon behavior is a redd, which is essentially a salmon nest, and you'll see salmon basically making these last nests to lay their eggs. So it's a nest dug by salmon and steelhead to deposit eggs. It's formed by the female using her tail to dig in small areas of gravel at the bottom of the stream. So this is an example, just shows fish dissection. So again, if you do the dissection, actually take out and show different features. So the stomach, the bladder, some of the organs, the gills, the liver. So just different features of the fish. So that's one module. So module number 2 is macroinvertebrates. And we will cover features of macroinvertebrate, kind of what they look like, talk a little bit about their functions in the environment. And again, macro can be seen with the eye, invertebrate, lack of backbone. And we'll talk about their importance. You know, they provide, here's some examples, they provide food for salmon, they can tell us a lot about water quality, and they have a lot of different roles and functions in the environment. So what we do is we go out there, you'll get to put on boots. If you get, again, if it's not a purely virtual experience, and we will dig around in the stream and try to collect some macroinvertebrates. We'll sort them. We'll use dichotomous keys to try to identify them, and then use the macroinvertebrates to give us an idea of what the water quality is. We'll calculate a simple tolerance index, and these are just some examples of macroinvertebrates you might see depending on the water quality. Beetles, dragonflies, caddisflies, and here's the sheet. And as I mentioned, this is the data sheet. So again, we're going to be scientists. So we take a look at what we find and whether or not they're sensitive. So they're basically intolerant to pollution, if they're somewhat sensitive, or if they're very tolerant. And then based on what you find, you can get a general water quality rating: poor, good, poor, fair, good, or excellent. So we, you know, generally will complete these forms by the end of a session of Salmon Watch. So water quality, so module number 3, we test the water quality to see if it's good for fish and macroinvertebrates. So specifically, we'll look at temperature. Is the water, is it warm or cold? Is it good for the fish? As we talked about in our quiz, fish like cold water. So is it cold enough for the fish, or is it too hot? A lot of the area streams are, and even the rivers are too hot for the fish during certain days of the year or times of the year. We'll also do a dissolved oxygen test. Fish need oxygen to survive. So we actually have a test that causes a color change to evaluate how much water or how much oxygen is in the water. And then we'll also do a pH, and we have various color matching activities for that to try to figure out what the pH is. So here students just taking some temperature. We have a number of different gauges, might be in Fahrenheit, might be in Celsius. It's an example of trying to color match the pH. So it's just with a color wheel, we add a few drops of a color indicator, reacts with the water. And then here's an example of the data form that we typically fill out. So we look at water temperature. Water temperature, a lot of times we'll measure air temperature, we'll do dissolved oxygen and pH, depending on whether or not we have a turbidity meter, and depending on what the water looks like, we might do turbidity, and we generally do not do salinity, although there are kits to do that. And then everything we do, we take a look at, again, tying back into salmon, tying back into the macroinvertebrates. So if you look here, so this shows your temperature range. Here, your temperature scale, so bottom is in Fahrenheit, top is in Celsius, and then for Chinook, because again, a lot of times we're out when Chinook are in, and basically what temperature ranges they like to spawn in for their migrating, and then what temperatures are lethal. And then also, you know, some of your macroinvertebrates, what temperatures are good. And generally, from a water quality perspective, we want temperatures that are under 64 degrees Fahrenheit or 18 degrees Celsius. So we want everything down this way. So like snails and crayfish tend to be on your tolerant side. So that's why we do have some thriving up here. If you look at your, you know, your fish benefits and some of your other macroinvertebrates tend to be down in here. So that's what we're hoping the water quality is. So again, the last module is riparian area. So now we're getting up out of the water and looking at the function of the habitat that's tied into the riparian area. So a riparian area is the area of land adjacent to a stream, lake, or wetland. And you can see the example below. Here's the stream, you have some grasses, you have some trees. If you look at the names of these species, if you're familiar with any of them, they're all local native species, trees and shrubs. And most healthy riparian areas have moist, fertile soils that support many types of moisture-loving plants. The plants provide food and shelter to numerous fish and wildlife species. And here's an example of if you're out there and you're looking at good habitat versus bad habitat, you can see, you know, there's a good habitat. You see the stream has a lot more, has some braided channels, has a lot more structure. It has, you know, rocks and other things in the stream. You have woody debris. You have a number of different, you know, nice gravel for the fish. You have, you know, multiple layers, so you have an understory, shrubs, trees providing shade, providing habitat. Here you have no channel complexity, limited vegetation, you know, basically the water is pretty shallow. There's no, you can see there's no trees here. There's not a lot of gravel. So again, when we're out there, we can take a look at the relationships and kind of get an idea for the habitat and how it also influences the stream itself. As I mentioned before, the importance of trees, they provide shade, they provide oxygen, those roots hold the soil in place to prevent erosion, and they also provide habitat. So one of the activities we have for the riparian area, it can be a nature walk. There's a number of different exercises you can do. And we also have a scavenger hunt. So you basically can go out and investigate the riparian area and take a look at different trees and seeds and roots and cover, you know, look for animals, insects. Okay, so normally I would have a time for questions. Certainly invite folks to, if there are specific questions, to go ahead and contact us and we can get you some answers. And I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you get a chance to participate in our program. Thank you very much.